Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Surviving Scientology Radio with your host, Jeffrey Augustine. Today we have on with us Mike Rinder. Mike, welcome to the show.
Hey, Jeffrey, how are you?
I'm impressed with you. You've been on a tear with your new bestseller, A Billion Years, My Escape from a Life in the Highest Ranks of Scientology.
Yeah, I've done a lot of a lot of podcasts, TV shows, radio shows, all sorts of stuff. So it's
Yeah.
very gratifying to know that people are interested in what I have to say and sort of appreciate the information that is contained in the book. So that's great.
Well, success is hard work.
It is.
You have to do a lot of media. Now, I went to your blog. I went to MikeRindersblog.org or Das Rinder blog, as some people call it. And I noticed that Gallery Books has put an advertisement. I'm looking at it here.
Yep.
The biography of King Charles, #1 New York Times bestseller. You're right next to it, A Billion Years.
Yep.
So I'm seeing King Charles and then Mike Rinder's book. That's very impressive. You're running into a big company.
It is. I was very appreciative. The team at Gallery Books has been nothing but overwhelmingly supportive and really wonderful people. And I have been impressed by their fortitude. They took no shit from Scientology. They forged on regardless of whatever threats came their way, and they didn't just sort of go, okay, we're sort of thinking about this and we're not going to cave into their demands. They were like, oh no, now we want to do this more. Now we want to get more serious. Now we want to do more stuff. Like, it was the exact opposite reaction to some other media outlets who have been a little intimidated or remain still to this day to be intimidated by Scientology. But not them, not Gallery Books and not Simon & Schuster. Gallery is just an imprint of Simon & Schuster that they do nonfiction books through. So
Sure.
They are wonderful people. I couldn't say enough good things about them, and they also know what they're doing. You know, like they're true professionals in this industry, an area that I had no clue about. And I kept saying to them, guys, you tell me what to do, because I don't have a clue. I don't know what's good. I don't know what's bad. I don't know what makes it work or what makes it not work. And they have been so patient and so supportive. It's been just a pleasure to deal with them every step of the way. And now they selected, A Billion Years as one of the just 4 books that they promoted in the New York Times Review of Books this week.
Yeah, but the other 2 books are My Travels with Mrs. Kennedy by Clint Hill, Jacqueline Kennedy, and then the Pasta Queen, Nadia Katerina Muno. So that's very impressive.
Yep.
And when you work with a company that's not afraid of Scientology, it's all the difference in the world.
It sure is, Jeff.
I was, with Tony Ortega was covering the Danny Masterson trial. I was there about 90% of the time. There were a few days I couldn't make it.
Yeah.
And I had a few journalists. I mean, Rolling Stone was there, Variety, Daily Mail, you name it, they were there. And I only had, as compared to maybe 10 years ago, I only had 2 journalists ask me if they thought they should be afraid of Scientology.
Right.
And so the percentage of journalists afraid of it's on a declining stat, way down. But when I looked at a Gallery Books ad next to His Majesty King Charles, and then Mike Rinder, A Billion Years, I immediately thought of L. Ron Hubbard talking about the British monarchy and British bankers out to get for the old L. Ron Hubbard era Scientologists who even remember that. Who are even
right.
Yeah.
Well, Ron had things to say about a lot of people, and most of them unkind. If you think about it, Jeffrey, if you go through the writings of L. Ron Hubbard, there are very, very few people who he has anything nice to say about. Like, he refers to all sorts of people, and the sort of general takeaway from it is that everybody except him is stupid, power hungry, trying to suppress people, has bad intentions, doesn't know what they're doing. It's like it sort of runs the gamut. There are very, very, I think Will Durant is one that I can think of that he was kind of complimentary about, but never said anything really bad about him. But they're few and far between.
No, it's funny because you can curve it at the very beginning. He shows just a little scintilla of maybe condescending humility. For example, Dianetics dedicated to 50,000 years of thinking men. Well, that's big of you, Ron. Mighty big of you. 50,000, and you got it right in those 50,000 years. And by the way, I have a note here because of statistics. Your book is called A Billion Years, My Escape from a Life in the Highest Ranks of Scientology, right?
Yep.
Now, this billion-year contract, technically, let's say you were in 40 years. I rounded it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you have 999,999,960 years remaining on that contract. Wow.
I fully intend to not fulfill that.
Exactly. And you're free because the Sea Org doesn't exist.
Yes, exactly, Jeffrey. Exactly. It's doesn't have any bank accounts. It doesn't have any offices or directors, no location, no nothing. So it's just all a big fakery.
So you're off the hook on those 999 million years, and that's good for you. Now, I had some questions for you, and it might, you start the book with your escape.
Yep.
You're going to the subway in London, the Tube.
Yep.
2007, right?
Yep.
Now, at that time, I started 2005 at Xenu.net as a critic, and I followed you in that Sweeney thing where you guys, you and Tommy Davis get him to blow up.
Yep.
Now, I know from my side, I'm hearing from leaks that Mike Rinder blew. And excuse the profanity. If this is children listening, you can turn down the volume or have them leave. But when I heard I
don't think there's a whole lot of kids listening to this particular podcast, Jeff.
It's family. It's not family friendly that way. But when I heard that you blew, I thought, no fucking way. No fucking way. Because you were like the Rock of Gibraltar. And like, Mike Rinder blew? No, that can't be. So I heard through the grapevine that it was because of the Sweeney incident. That's what triggered it. So we were getting pretty good information and leaks on our site at Xenu.net, which was in the big board. But so it's a really exciting opening. And I really like the fact that you could have written a book at any time since you escaped. You blew in 2007. I like the fact that you waited. I really thought that gave the book a lot more depth and interest because of everything we've been through. I checked. The first podcast I did with you was 2014.
Is that right? That long ago?
Yes. So where does the time go? So we have an 8-year record of broadcast excellence. We check in periodically once or twice a year, right?
Exactly.
And I remember one of our New Year's podcasts, I asked you your forecast for the coming year, and you said, pain, which proved to be true. But we've been doing this 8 years and the time flies, but I like the fact you waited. Some people, when they're out, they're so raw and immediate. Like Tori Chrisman's videos, she blew literally within a week and then was doing a live video in front of the Boston Org with Mark Bunker.
Right.
And there's such a raw immediacy to dancing in Boston, I think she calls it. But your book has a much better view because everything you've been through, the independent movement, going clear, aftermath, So the depth was really good. The book was extraordinarily well written. And I
Well,
think,
thank you, Jeffrey. I just got to tell you that it wasn't entirely due to brilliant strategic planning that I delayed writing the book.
yeah,
It was partly and mostly, and in fact, almost exclusively due to my inability to force myself to sit down and do it. You know, procrastinator extraordinaire. I could never bring myself to apply myself enough to doing it. I always considered that it was going to be a very difficult task. And one of the reasons for that, Jeff, is because I knew that there were so many things that I would have to include, and so many sort of incidents or circumstances or interactions with people that I would have to include, and that I needed to get them all right.
right.
Because if I didn't, I knew that Scientology would then pounce on those things that I had gotten wrong and use that to invalidate everything that was in the book. You know, Larry Wright made the famous error in Going Clear, despite the enormous fact-checking and scrutiny that that book went through, of in one place listing the publication date of Dianetics, the Modern Science of Mental Health, wrongly. I think he said it was May 10th, 1950. And of
Right.
course, Scientology went crazy. Oh, he couldn't even get the publication date of Dianetics right. How can you trust anything in this book? And of course, I have all these different things. And so, you know, it was sort of a fear of mine. And that, the other thing that I had a problem with, frankly, and which my editor slash therapist is what she ended up being, actually resolved, was when I wrote, I sat down eventually and I started putting together a time track, like a linear recounting of all the events that I considered that were important, all the things that had happened, and put them in time sequence, and then tried to describe and flesh them out. And, you know, COVID had a big impact on me because I found myself sitting around at home with nothing to do, and Christy's going, "You better write your book, you better write your book, you better write your book, you better write your book," like the queen nudger. And I sort of fleshed out this historical timeline, and frankly, it was pretty long, but it was extraordinarily dry. It
Yeah.
was written like a legal brief. In other words, here's the facts, this is what happened, here are the players, this is what occurred, here's what went down. And when I finally got an editor, she said to me, "I love all the things that are in this book. I love the detail. I love how broad it is and how much you've experienced, but we have got to hear from you,
Yeah.
what you were thinking, what you were feeling, why you did the things that you did." And frankly, that is one of the more difficult things for someone who's been raised a Scientologist to tap into. Emotions are not things in Scientology. As you well know, there is a lot of time and effort spent in Scientology to prevent you from being what Scientologists call misemotional. And misemotional is displaying any emotion, frankly. And this is considered to be a bad thing, and it is something that is contra survival, in the words of Scientology. It means that expressing emotion is not forwarding your survival. It is something that is limiting you in some way. So you learn not to be emotional. And by suppressing those emotions, it's kind of hard to pull them back up again. Like, what was I thinking? I don't know. It was like all kind of like not something that I was allowed to think about. So, recall that. And that's why I say she became my editor and therapist, because what would happen is she would read a chapter and then she would say, okay, I've got a bunch of notes here. And we would sit and talk for maybe 2 or 3 hours going through the chapter. And she'd say, so tell me how you felt right then. Yeah. Oh, I haven't got a clue. I don't know. Well, dig, think about it. Like, you've got to come up with something to help the reader understand what was going on. And I think the thing that I am most proud of, perhaps, in the book is that I was able, or feel like I have been able to communicate a lot of the inner processes involved in getting stuck in the mind prison of Scientology, and then the processes required to go through to get out of that. And sure. I just don't think that anybody understands, or that it's very difficult for someone who has not experienced it to understand it. And I hope that, if nothing else, my book helps people understand how you get trapped, and what a sort of a monumental thing it is to extricate yourself from that prison. Sure.
It's far more profound. Someone asked me about reinventing themselves. I had a client, and they said, they're in their, actually, they're 52, same age you were when you left Scientology.
Yeah.
And they're saying, I need to reinvent myself, because they just sold a company and made a lot of money. And it's sort of, what do I do? They had the opposite problem of you, yeah. Where you go from number 3 man in Scientology to selling cars in Denver. And there's nothing wrong with that, because we all have crisis moments in life.
Right.
So indoctrination is different than reinvention. And I think you do a very good job. Something you said that spoke to me as a parent, you said you wanted to write the book to your kids, and because they may have questions to ask you and you might not be around. And so that's something you deal with as you get older, is your own mortality. Mm-hmm. So I think you have a great editor who grew that out of you, because it is hard to talk about how could you believe that? How could you do it?
Yes.
Having been a Pentecostal, people will say, how could you speak? How could you have spoken in tongues or believed in faith healing? And to do that experience justice, to say that's who I was and what I believed, and to give it some reverence of your experience, the authentic struggle, is really interesting. I had a couple questions. Yeah, I have 25 questions I want to ask Mike Rinder. We're not going to get through them all.
Yeah, the way that we talk, Jeffrey, maybe 2.
I'll just add this. I have a book that I've been threatening to write on Scientology forever.
Yeah.
Now, I actually have a 400,000 word manuscript, and Hubbard's not even dead yet. So I think in 2023, I'm going to start putting it out, volume 1, volume 2, volume 3. But like you and Larry Wright, I'm obsessively detailed, but I went into a lot of early Scientology because I'm really fascinated with how things get created, because having been in corporate for 30 years, everything actually has to be done. people, it seems trivial to say that, but you had to actually sit down and write the damn book.
Right.
And you had a great editor helping you, and you had to draw out that experience. In the opening sequence, I saw it as a movie. A man running, escaping from a cult. It was so visceral. It had so much impact. And then you draw the reader in. So a couple of questions I had for you, because Scientology is a series of corporations, but it's also an indoctrination process that's so highly engineered and perfected. It's hellishly perfect the way they can psycho-engineer someone into an identity that does become a prison of belief. But what I want to ask you, because any cult or corporation or any organization is a hierarchy. Some are just stronger than others, right?
Mm-hmm.
One question I was left, when did you know you had reached the inner circle status in Scientology, that you were at the top in the inner circle? Was there a defining moment when you said, I've really made it into the inner circle, or was it gradual? Because you did become inner circle.
Well, yeah, I think that the first time Jeffrey was perhaps the first international event I did. You know, where I was brought out on stage, and here is one of the, you know, the new breed of management who is now going to brief the Scientology world on what is going on. And that was a pretty significant thing to be chosen for that. I also, you know, I think that being involved in the IRS negotiations was another sort of major moment of, well, it's just Miscavige, me, Marty, Norman Starkey, and Heber. That's it. That's the A team. So I think that and that came maybe a couple of years after the first international event I did. I can't even remember when that was, maybe late 80s or something, you know, 89 or 90 might have been the first one. And then obviously the IRS was 92 into 93. So
Right.
those would be the points that I would define as, okay, I'm at the pinnacle of the Scientology hierarchy.
Yeah. And that's interesting, because when you're international, you're out in front speaking as an international spokesperson. You have arrived. And it comes with a great deal of crushing responsibility, but there's also a lot of behind the scenes stuff. And that is a lot of weight.
Right.
That's a big job in any organization. So you've arrived, but there's dangers, and you're a true believer also. You believe you're forwarding Scientology to clear the planet. And so that's the difference between, yes, Scientology legally is a corporation, but it also wants to clear the planet as its stated mission.
Right.
And there's something sinister in clearing the planet.
Well, there's something impossible in clearing the planet too.
Well, impossible, but also sinister is you read Science of Survival.
Yep.
Yeah, they're certainly impossible. We crunch the numbers all the time. Tony Ortega's recent things about the shrinkage of Scientology. So Dr. Hubbard's had a lot of contempt for people, but one thing he didn't know about were the real principles of growing a corporation, growing the business. Right. Which leads me to ask one other question. When Hubbard was alive, he was running Scientology through missions, which were basically franchises. So he had mission holders, and they would sell Scientology services. And Tom Cruise came in, correct me if I'm wrong, through the Sherman Oaks mission from like Hitler. So when you came aboard, how important was it to Miscavige to get rid of the missions and L. Ron Hubbard himself? This is a bit of history I wanted to know about. Did you have any familiarity with it?
Well, it was it was really Hubbard that decided that the missions were out of control. And Miscavige carried out his wishes in bringing them under control. Hubbard in the late 70s became convinced that people were trying to steal his empire from him. He, like when we were in Clearwater in the late 70s, he had created this thing called the Office of Evaluation and Execution, E&E. And he put like 20 people into this office, and they were supposed to do evaluations and submit them to him personally. And my wife at the time, Kathy, was one of those evaluators, along with a whole bunch of other people. And he began a sort of a campaign with these evaluators that they had to raise their confront of evil. And he called this con evil evals. And they were supposed to evaluate orgs, every org in the world, every Scientology organization in the world, to find the external influences that were preventing those organizations from expanding. You know, Hubbard was a man of fads. He would come up with a new thing, whether it was, you know, overts or withholds, or the R6 bank, or, you know, evil purposes. Like, it was always drugs. It was always some new thing that he had discovered as, okay, this is the answer. This is what's now going to make us take off. Now we're going to rocket to the stars. This is going to blow your socks off. This is amazing. It is the brand new latest thing. And for a while, that was con evil. And what came up, and he kept insisting that someone is like there are what's called external influences. That was where that expression first came from. External influences that are seeking to steal people, mailing lists, and staff members from Scientology organizations. And this was the beginning of the World Institute of Scientology Enterprises, which was not created to get L. Ron Hubbard tech into the fourth dynamic. It was created to force businesses owned by Scientologists to license with WISE for the use of the technology so they could be shut down if they were doing something that was, in the eyes of Hubbard, improper, i.e., taking stuff. There was a bunch of policy letters that came out at this time, one of them called moon ripping. And that was Scientologists who owned businesses who were employing Scientology staff members and then making them, quote, leave stuff in the org to go work in the business. And it turned out at that time that many of the businesses that were doing that were Guardian office people, because the Guardian office people worked 9 to 5, and many of them had their own little businesses. They had cleaning companies, they had this and that. So a lot of them were GO people. And the other people who were stealing public clears, address lists, whatever, at least in the mind of Hubbard, were missions. Missions were hogging the public. They were supposed to be flowing up the bridge to the orgs and instead delivering all sorts of additional services to those public and not turning them over to the orgs. So this is the beginning of the end of the mission network. And when Hubbard found out that missions were making exorbitant amounts of money and wasn't proportionally ending up in the coffers of the actual organizations. And of course, the mission network at the time was run by the Guardian's Office. That was how the Guardian's Office was funded, from the 10% tithes from all missions around the world to the mission office worldwide, which was in a shed at the bottom of the grounds at St. Hill, controlled by the Guardian's Office. Guardian's Office worldwide ran Mission Office worldwide. Mission Office worldwide basically collected 10% of the revenues from missions and otherwise let them do what they wanted. And this, when in the early 90s, the early 80s, there was the sort of David Mayo and a lot of, we don't like the new breed of management and blah, 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 blah. And the whispers started from the mission network, et cetera, et cetera. Hubbard told Miscavige, you better get these guys under control. And you had better move in and let them know who's boss. And that is what the Mission Holder Conference in San Francisco came from.
Yeah, the so-called Mission Holder Massacre.
Right. And he directed, and it was recorded, and a transcript was done of it, and Hubbard himself ordered that transcript be distributed so that everybody got the message, you don't fuck with us anymore. And we're taking you're not keeping the money, you're not keeping the clears, you're not keeping PC folders, we're taking it all. And that's what happened. So the mission network was destroyed by Hubbard himself. Even though Miscavige was the messenger, right, it was actually Hubbard that directed that is what was to happen.
Yeah, that is so fascinating. For a couple of reasons. One, back then I was in LA and I was buying, and I knew some people who had left the missions and left Scientology. Mm-hmm. And I got a hold of something. John Ziegel was making the Ziegel tapes. And it was really talking about the new structure of Scientology that the so-called Z lawyers had created, the Lensk brothers and
the ex-attorneys.
Sorry, yeah, the ex-attorneys. Which almost sounds like a Marvel universe, super villains, ex-attorneys. And, I was following this. I remember it was a lot of money to get these Ziegel tapes. But so this is where the Young Turks, the New Guard, the finance police, all kinds of things get created. Miscavige becomes more prominent behind the scenes as the knife man, the hatchet man for Hubbard. And these are the kinds of things that interest me because you're starting to come up as an executive. And when this was going down, when the Mission Holder network was taken apart, where were you at? Were you in that mix or were you doing another job?
No, I was at that time at Gold, being various WDC positions. And in fact, I write in the book, the day after the San Francisco Mission Holder massacre, that morning, when they all flew in from San Francisco, I had been woken up by Shelley and was at LAX to fly back to Clearwater because my infant child had died. Oh, yeah. And I met them at the airport. I had not gone. Me and a few other people had been sort of left behind to take care of international management at the time. And so, the only Guillaume had gone and Wendell Reynolds, the finance dictator or whatever he was called at the time, and Norman Starkey and Steve Marlowe, who was the first inspector general, had gone with Miscavige, but not me. I can't remember if Yeager went. I don't think Mark Ingber went. There were a few others that were at CMO International that we were sort of, you're supposed to make sure that Scientology keeps going while we're off taking care of the mission holders.
So basically, would you say Would it be fair to say that the mission holders had no idea that there was an ambush and there was no chaos on your side, on the Miscavige side of things? It was
Yes,
all
absolutely.
so they didn't see it coming.
Nope. Had no clue.
Yeah, and that leads to another question. So the mission holder massacre, you have to deal with the death of your child, which is terrible to go through. And you're not allowed to experience that really and fully, deeply. It's a no case on post.
Right.
Which is pretty brutal. And
It
those
is.
are the kind of things you're supposed to. I was in New York when my father died. I got a call Sunday night. Your father's dead. And I was in New York on business. And here's the difference. This was the beginning of a week-long meeting, and I was an important part of the meeting as the Western Regional guy. And I called my boss and said, my father died. He said, get on a plane first thing in the morning. He even arranged to get me a car to drive to the airport. He said, go home, take care of your family. And that was a long, lonely flight home.
Yep.
Because I was close to my father. And he died young. He died at 53, very unexpectedly. And you are dealing with the death of your child, and yet in Scientology, death has such a different meaning. It's not, it doesn't, you're not allowed to be touched by it.
Right. That's exactly right.
And that was a very painful part of the book to read, because we all know people who've lost, children, and that's horrible. And I was glad you were able to put that in the book. So in context, there's a corporate coup, a takeover, where you're going to destroy these Miscavige and Hubbard. Actually, Hubbard's going to destroy these people financially. And I know some of the old mission holders, Ben Corridon, for example. Right. And he talks about how brutal it was, and it was just caught them off guard. Another question I had. So Miscavige's action chief, he's Author Services International COB, right, chairman of the board.
Mm-hmm.
And you guys have, once you dispose of the mission holders, the next thing that happens, Hubbard goes into hiding. But really, Hubbard dies, and there's the death event where Robert Von Young does a video that's still online, the late Robert Von Young.
Mm-hmm.
You manufacture the myth of, and this is the myth-making part, and that's why I wanted to know, when you're an executive, you're part of the myth-making structure. And again, that's different from, a regular corporation. Hubbard could not be allowed to have just been an old man who stroked out and died and had medical problems.
Right.
Where were you when you first got word that Hubbard had died? What happened?
At the Shrine Auditorium, along with everybody else.
So
I talk in the book about having seen Annie that morning in the complex, and I had not seen her for many years. I was actually pretty close to Annie at one point. I had known her since I was on the Apollo, and she had come to Clearwater and actually selected me to become the head of the Commodore's Messenger Org in Clearwater. And I knew that there was something big happening, but I wasn't sure what it was. And, like all good Scientologists, you're always looking for the next, the great hope, this is what, now we're going to have, now we're going to, now we're like, there's always this carrot being dangled, not just for people to pay money, but to keep the hope alive that we are actually accomplishing something, not just spinning our wheels. And I write in the book about how, I was sort of wondering, well, if Annie's here, maybe that means that OT8 is coming. Wow. Because Hubbard had been promising this forever. And, it had to be something of that magnitude. Like, she wouldn't be here otherwise. It just was so and she didn't seem to want to talk. And we were in an elevator, and she was like being very circumspect and like didn't want anybody to know who she was. And I sort of understood that. I understood that very few people would recognize Annie Broker, even if she was standing right in front of them. And she wanted it that way, and Hubbard wanted it that way. He didn't want them to be recognized when they were driving around in their motorhome. And so it didn't strike me as, okay, this is a bad news thing. It could have been good news, and she was just being like, I'm undercover, so don't say anything out loud in an elevator. But I found out when that announcement was made, and I didn't even know what had really been going on with Hubbard until many, many years later when I spoke to Sarge. And he told his story about what the final days with Ron were like. And that to me was pretty shocking. That was like, oh, wow. Because, you know, I accepted a lot of what was said by Miscavige and Pat Broker and Earl Cooley at that event, just like all other Scientologists. And the reason is because it was what I wanted to hear. I didn't want to hear that Hubbard had died of a stroke with pancreatitis, being injected with Vistaril, and was a mumbling idiot sending Sarge off to find BTs on fence posts. That would have shaken my world so badly, it just couldn't possibly have been true. You know what I mean? So it's like...
Well, this is really interesting. And I'll give you by way of comparison and contrast. And I've told, you know, when I left university, I graduated, I worked at Hughes Aircraft as a technical writer. And this was Cold War. When I was at Hughes, we had a CEO. The Hughes Medical Foundation still owns Hughes Aircraft. And the CEO died. And it was sad because he was a very well-respected man, right?
Mm-hmm.
But he was a CEO who died. I believe he died of lung cancer. But he died and the company went on, and it wasn't this larger-than-life figure who had created everything. He was simply the CEO of Hughes Aircraft. He died.
Mm-hmm.
The difference with Hubbard dying is you have to create a mythic structure in which his death has to be larger and more extraordinary than that of a regular death. So the other question I had for you, how large did the ghost of L. Ron Hubbard loom after his death?
Enormous. I mean, it still looms enormous.
But I mean,
Miscavige has been in charge of Scientology for longer than Hubbard.
Correct.
Right. And yet, still, you can't say anything in Scientology that is contradictory or even questioning of Hubbard. It has taken this long, 20 years plus, for Miscavige to have convinced Scientologists that if he says something, it's true. They don't automatically these days check and see if what Miscavige says is what Hubbard said. They now just accept it. They accept it as the word of COB, and COB is proven himself so often and so incredibly well that we trust everything that he says. So he has almost reached the status of Hubbard. But still, to every good Scientologist, keeping Scientology working and L. Ron Hubbard being the only source of true knowledge, of technology, of the answers to every question about the well-being of man and mankind comes from L. Ron Hubbard, not from anybody else. And that is still true in Scientology, even though Miscavige has done a pretty brilliant job of sort of sidling into, because he knew he could never say, listen to me, don't listen to Hubbard, because every Scientologist would reject that. Now it's become listen to Hubbard and listen to Miscavige. And as time has gone on, he has done things that are completely contradictory to what Hubbard would have said or done, and has managed to pull that off and get away with it. Like, there is no briefing course in Scientology. The course that Hubbard said was the most important study of Scientology technology, which consists of Hubbard lectures, 350 Hubbard lectures, Miscavige did away with and has never replaced. And this is accepted by Scientologists. If he had tried that, if he had canceled the briefing course and said, okay, St. Hills no longer deliver the briefing course, in the time of Hubbard, he would have been declared an SP.
Right.
If he had done it in years, like the first 5 years after Hubbard's death, people would have been screaming in the streets and there would have been a mass mutiny.
Right.
If he'd done it in 10 years, there would have been a lot of disaffection and a bunch of people would have sort of faded away into the distance. But he bided his time. He's like done this campaign to make himself unchallengeable and unquestionable, just like Hubbard, without replacing Hubbard.
Yeah, and that's very fascinating. One of the questions I wanted to ask as we conclude, because we're coming up on an hour
already.
Yeah, I mean, it's I guess it's a two-part question, because I appreciate your observation. There's been a migration where David Miscavige has been able to substitute himself for Hubbard.
Yes.
But this gets into the esoteric metaphysical aspects of Scientology. You know, when the basics came out, Miscavige actually was able to sell the rank and file that the basic books had been corrupted.
Right.
And he actually said that Dianetics was basically unreadable, which was something else. If you found Dianetics unreadable, you're not alone. I found it unreadable, so I wasn't alone either.
Right.
It's sort of a game where he's such a gambler. But back to my esoteric question. When I was a Christian, I would read the Bible. I'd feel like Jesus was present, spiritually present. You know, God was spiritually present. And when the basics came out, I remember a lot of Scientologists in the promotional videos they'd put out say, I felt like Ron was right there in the room with me. Was there ever a transcendental Hubbard who was felt to be invisible and omnipresent and pervading Scientology? That is, could you tune in to this transcendental Hubbard, or had he really died and gone to Target 2? What is the relationship of Scientologists to Hubbard in transcendental terms? That's kind of like the final question I wanted to ask. I want to do more interviews with you. I could do one every day for a month, but because it's so interesting. This is why people are interested in fascinating. So has it changed over the years on the transcendental Hubbard after his death?
I think it varies person to person, Jeffrey. I think that there are some people who are like, Ron is speaking to me through the air conditioning vent kind of people.
Yeah.
That are just kind of the wackos that you find anywhere. But I would say that the general population of Scientologists feel that because they've been convinced that Hubbard only had their best interests at heart, and Hubbard was a man of the people, and that Hubbard did everything for them, because this is something that Hubbard said a lot. He said, I'm giving this freely to you. I'm making this, all this in vast wealth of knowledge available to you so that you can save yourself and save everybody around you. And what a magnanimous, wonderful guy I am. And that sort of pervasive idea that Hubbard is this benign presence that permeates every aspect of a Scientologist's life, then when you're engaging by reading Hubbard or listening to a lecture, you feel like, oh my God, Ron is speaking to me. And you hear Scientologists say this, oh my God, it's like he wrote it just for me.
Yeah.
Like it's my, like he understood me so well that he is able to permeate my very beingness. And this is something that Hubbard loved to sort of inculcate into people, that he understood them better than they understand themselves. I mean, that's the fundamental conceit of Dianetics and Scientology, is that L. Ron Hubbard understands you better than you understand yourself. You never figured out you had a reactive mind. You never figured out, if you had figured that out, you never figured out how to solve it. You never figured out that Xenu landed you on planet Earth in a DC-8 and dropped hydrogen bombs on you in a volcano. Ron did that. And not only did Ron do it, he went through the torturous, almost killed him process of finding a path for everybody else to follow. So this idea that Hubbard is this greater than everybody else collectively all put together source of wisdom and knowledge and technology is like, you can't get away from that in Scientology. If you're not on that train, you're not on the Scientology train, because that is what Scientology is. It is the absolute conviction that L. Ron Hubbard is the answer to all questions that you will ever have ever had, or anybody on earth has ever had. And unless you buy that conceit, you're not really a Scientologist. So
not at all. Yeah.
I mean, that would be my answer. It is a very transcendental, he still lives with us today through his technology. And you will hear Scientologists say that all the time. It's like, for a Christian, Jesus lives today through his teachings that you find in the Bible. Sure. L. Ron Hubbard lives today in the head of every Scientologist because of his discoveries in technology.
That's well put. In my own work, I call it, I think of religions and cults as plug and play identity systems. So the search for truth ends and belief begins, because Hubbard will tell you who you are, what your problem is, how to fix it.
Right.
So suddenly your consciousness will align to that. That is, you want to identify and become one with the Hubbard mind.
Yes.
And that's the pernicious thing about it is to renounce Scientology is to renounce your own identity.
Yes, that Jeff, that's exactly. Once you are inside that bubble, that is exactly right. Renouncing Scientology is equated to renouncing your identity, and also admitting how stupid you are.
Well, yeah, and it's more it's part of that, but my experience was people will fight when they become their identity. They say, that's who I am, that's what I stand for. They'll fight and die for that.
Yes, absolutely.
They'll fight and die for that. But what happens, at least in my case with Christianity, I couldn't believe a lot of it anymore. And in your case, the nightmarish hell of being in the hole, that will shatter an identity structure when the pain becomes so great that the identity is not worth protecting or keeping.
Yes, and I would add to that, Jeffrey, also when the hope fades or the hope is extinguished, that to me is the defining moment when someone turns the corner and goes, okay, I have got to get the fuck out of this because there's no more hope. Hope is what keeps you going, in my view. And what, you can physically abuse someone and that will not necessarily break them. If you take away the hope that things are ever going to get better or ever going to change, that is what ultimately breaks them. So that was at least my experience, and that's what I try to describe in the book. What that point was where I went, okay, there is nothing left for me here. It couldn't be worse than this. Nothing could be worse than this. I'm out of here.
Yeah. And that's how a 52-year-old man is on the streets of London with your heart pounding out of your chest, escaping from everything with just the clothes on your back and a few dollars.
Yep.
And that's how the book opens. And the book is so well written. It's a story everyone should read because you have an everyman component. You open with a crisis. Everything is gone. There's a saying in Zen that karma, when you work it, it's like snow being thrown into a roaring furnace. Everything is incinerated and gone. And that's why I think the opening of the book is so good, because you are clothes on your back fleeing.
Right.
And you could be someone fleeing from East Germany during the Cold War. But in your case, you're fleeing from your own prison of belief, and it doesn't matter what the cost will be. You have to finally, in the end, find the truth and recover yourself. So it's a tale, and then what you went through. And that's why I think the book is so outstanding. And I'm glad your publisher stood behind you 100%. We need publishers like that, journalists who say, I'm not afraid of Scientology.
Right.
So again, it's a billion years. My escape from a life in the highest ranks of Scientology. Mike, I'm so glad you wrote your book. And good
Thank
work.
you, Jeffrey.
Yeah, I'm so glad. Well, we've been waiting for a long time. Everyone's waiting for Mike Rinder's book. And good job on being seen next to His Majesty King Charles.
That's been the dream of my life. That's what I've aspired to my entire life.
Life is so full of surprises. When Leah's book came out, her book was next to a book by President Obama. And it was amazing. So those are part of life's little surprises that you get sometimes. And it's a David Miscavige, eat your heart out. No one's comparing you to a king. In fact, you're getting comparisons that are not flattering at all.
Do not compare him to insult him by comparing him to Martin Luther King. Okay.
Oh my God! I mean, when I go there, some of the insanity. My district, just because it's coming up on New Year's, and we're not, we have done New Year's in the past. 2023 is coming up.
Yes. My prediction. More pain.
Outstanding. I concur. Pleasure having you on this show.
You too. As always, Jeffrey, thank you so much. It's always great to chat with you. You're such an entertaining, interesting, thoughtful person. I appreciate all that you and Karen do and have done to support me and support Leah and support the the cause of exposing the abuses of Scientology. You're stalwarts in our world, and often unsung heroes, and I appreciate you enormously.
Well, thank you, Mike. That means a lot to Karen and I. And we'll interview you sometime in the future, because we've got 8 years into this, and we're just going to keep going for the long haul.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, thank you for listening to the podcast, everyone. For Surviving Scientology Radio, it's Jeff Augustine. As always, we'll be in very good touch.